Hello and welcome back. This is Dawn with another video for Pink Fresh Studio. So today I'm going to be sharing with you one of my methods for getting the most out of my supplies. Too often we end up just collecting our supplies rather than using them because we either A, don't have the time to sit down and complete a card from start to finish, or B, the crafty mojo just isn't there when we do have the time to create. Now if this sounds familiar, keep watching because I'm going to show you how I work around that. All of today's cards will be featuring the Be Fearless product suite here. There is a stamp, a die, a stencil, and a press plate available. I will be using the stamp, die, and stencil today. So often when we get new products, if we don't have an idea for them right away, they kind of go into our stash until we may or may not have an idea for them, and they could end up just sitting there and we don't actually use them. So what I do a lot of the times is I will take a crafty session, and instead of having the end goal of creating a card in mind, my goal is just to use a product. So here my goal was just to stamp and color these pieces. Now, these kinds of stamp sets that are all in one, so all of these images are on one stamp set, are great for this because what I can do is I can stamp out a whole bunch of these, do all of my coloring, and cut them out. And then I have a stash of these to use on future cards, and I don't have to think about the layout because I will have the die cuts and I can use them in any manner in which I choose. Having them stamped in the middle or on the edges isn't going to mess up a design. So once I have them stamped, I'm going to use the coordinating stencils here to add my color. Again, I'm going to pick out a color palette. So here, the only thing I have to make a decision on is my color choices. And I can choose to go with one of my go-to favorites, or I can decide, you know what, I want to try a new color combo, or I could do both, right? So I've stamped out 6 of these, and now I'm going to use, in this one, I went with my go-to color combos, my favorites, which are sage green and kind of a coral color. So here I'm going to start with stencil number 1, and I'm stenciling in the eucalyptus, and I'm going very uneven here. You'll notice that I'm not doing a solid fill of stencil. I rarely ever solidly fill in stencils. I like that transition. I'm a watercolorist, and that's one of the reasons I really love watercolor is I like those transitions from dark to light. And so I kind of emulate that here with my ink blending through my stencils. So for the next stencil, I'm going to get the base of the flowers, and that's going to be coral reef. Yes, coral reef. And again, I'm going to do a very light application of this because I want that variation in light and dark. And I can build up the color further if I want to enhance some of the depth. So I'll go unevenly here and then add just a little bit more color to some areas. So for the third stencil, I'm going to do another layer of that coral reef and then hit it with just a little bit of passion fruit in some areas to deepen it up. So what I really like about this method, again, is that I'm not worried about creating a card at the end. So I really get to enjoy the stenciling process and experiment with different techniques and colors if I want to. Now here's where I'm going to bring in that passion fruit like I mentioned. And again, I'm not going to fill in everything. I'm just going to hit a couple of areas here and there for just a little bit of a deeper value of that coral color. Because dye inks are slightly translucent, you can layer them to create deeper and deeper color. So for the fourth stencil, I am going to go ahead and use that passion fruit again. And as you can see here, even though we're using the same color over the areas that we had previously done, because we're adding another layer of that color, it's going to deepen it up, and you're definitely going to be able to see it. Now that final stencil is going to add the details on the leaves, and I am just using another layer of that eucalyptus, and I'm going a little bit heavier handed here. You could certainly try experimenting with a different color on this particular layer. You could add in a yellow or a blue, even a purple. I mean, have fun with it. Again, this session right here is all about just creating these pieces that will eventually become our ephemera, if you will, that we can use on a future card. So there's no pressure. We can just have fun and explore. So I decided to create a little bit different color combo here on 2 of them, and I decided to do a mix of the coral reef and clementine. So I'm unevenly filling in these flowers, leaving some white space here that I can now blend that clementine into. And this is the first layer, so I'm going to go very lightly here. I don't want to go too heavy too quickly because then I can't build up the color on those subsequent stencils. And then I'll use that same method for the remaining stencils for those. And when I'm done, I'm going to end up with 6 panels here that are all stenciled and ready to go. I used the coordinating die to cut all of these out. And because this is all one die, it's going to cut them out really quickly. And then I'm going to have this large pile of ephemera here to pull from to create focal points for future projects. Now, sometimes your Mojo will be sparked and then you can go ahead and create a card or a scrapbook page right away. But if not, it's okay. It's ready to go when you do have inspiration and you've scratched that itch of doing something creative that day. Now in my next session, I just focused on doing backgrounds and panels. So I pulled out the new press plates, the twist pattern and the decorative frames. And I knew that I wanted to do some hot foil and some BETTERPRESS with these plates since you can use these for both. So I again decided to stick with my same color palette that I had done all my florals in. But I did want to add some gold as just a little something extra. Hey, at this point, I didn't even know what I was going to be using and what I wasn't going to be using, but I knew that gold would look good with my color choices that I had already picked out. So I would have them at the ready as an option should I want them, because as much as I love foiling, if I have to stop in the middle of a project to foil something, 9 times out of 10, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to find something else to put in the background to finish the project. Again, the results are stunning and I love them so much, but honestly, if I don't set aside a session just to do hot foil, I'm not going to reach for them. So this is the perfect way to use those hot foil plates, those BETTERPRESS plates, and get some beautiful results because your end goal was just to create these. So if you're goal oriented, this is a perfect method for you. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do all of my hot foiling up front and get that out of the way because it is another machine I have to pull out. You have to wait for it to heat up, all of that good stuff. So it just makes sense to do all of them at the same time. So I've already set up the decorative frames there. I'm letting that heat up. And while that heats up, I'm using the coordinating die for the twist pattern here. And to save time, while my plate was heating up, I went ahead and prepped my die. And now I can go ahead and prep this one as well with the coordinating die cut. But you guys, look at how gorgeous this is when you hot foil this plate. Oh my goodness. So again, ideas are already starting to come into play here. They're starting to brew and they're starting to take shape. So I knew I've got these hot foiled and I do have dies. So I'm going to go ahead and die cut some of these. And that way I have them available if I choose to use them, because remember at this point, I have no real plan for my cards in the end. I just want to get all of these pieces ready for me to create cards. That way I don't have to stop in the middle of creating to create these extra pieces. So I went ahead and die cut this, the decorative frames, the hot foiled one apart, and you can see here, gives you all of these delicate little frames that are absolutely gorgeous. The detail on this press plate is impressive, you guys. The little patterns are just beautiful and they foil so cleanly. I really, really, really like this plate, in case you couldn't tell. Okay, so next I decided to do some of these backgrounds using the actual BETTERPRESS system for some letterpress. And like I said, I went ahead and used the same colors that I used from my previous session so that I knew that they would all coordinate and match. And I did use the Pink Fresh inks as well as the BETTERPRESS cotton panels. And here you can see all of that detail and how beautiful this press plate is. And this is stunning used as is as a full background, which you will see some of in our future cards. Okay, so I did go ahead and do this one in the sage. I did one in eucalyptus. I did one in the coral reef. And now I'm going to do a couple of the twist pattern in the BETTERPRESS as well. Again, this is just going to give me multiple options to pull from when I go to create my cards. So here you can see from those 2 sessions, I have a lot of backgrounds. I have some frames. I've got florals for my focal point. And you could also have done sentiments at this time as well. I happen to have a large stash of sentiments because I stamp and cut multiple every time I craft. So now when I sit down to create a card, I have the bulk of what I need right here and I really just have to concentrate on the layout. Speaking of, let's go ahead and start making those cards. And we're going to do them in order of how they developed. So this first card, I actually got a lot of my ideas for the subsequent cards while I was working out my arrangement for this first card. Now, I was immediately drawn to these gold frames, and I knew I wanted to use them as frames, but first I needed to build up a little bit of stability. So I did cut a couple extra blanks, and I glued those one on top of the other just to make them a little thicker, a little sturdier. And I actually really liked this layout. I didn't end up with it in the end, but looking back at the footage, I really liked that layout. But again, I'm not focusing right now on coming up with my finished design per se. Right now I'm exploring. I know I have a lot of product here, so I can make multiple cards. So I just kind of get an idea for different layouts. This is another really nice one that I really like. And I've left all of this footage in here because many of you have mentioned that you like to see me kind of work through some different designs, and it gives you extra ideas. Even though we didn't end up with these in the end and these aren't the finished cards, it gives you a look at some different variations as well. And once I had landed on the main elements that I wanted to use, I went ahead and took out some of my sentiments. Now I store all of my extra sentiments in a stamp storage bag, and then I can just pull from those to get an idea for the scale of the sentiment, the color of the sentiment. And again, even if I don't end up using some of them in the end of this card, I am making mental note of ones that I like with these colors, ones that I like with these florals, and so I can have a better idea for my subsequent cards, and it won't take me quite as long. The first card always takes me the longest because again, I want to try out all of the different arrangements and ideas. And again, because I had those prior sessions and I created all of these things to swap in and out, I have more choices and I don't have to stop to make new pieces. So it becomes much more fun and less frustrating because I have so much to pull from. So here I decided, what if I gave this something to kind of anchor it? And I pulled out the folk edge circles, and I do have some of these already cut, again, in a stamp storage pocket. I keep several of these. Anything that I don't use from a previous card, I'll just put in that stamp pocket and put into my stash there. And I don't end up using this on this card. However, I do end up using this circle on a subsequent card. So again, it's kind of like I'm taking mental notes. Even though this doesn't work for this particular card, that circle, I like the way that it fits inside the circled background of that twisted pattern there. And so I eventually removed this, but again, I've taken that mental note that I like the way these look together. So I removed the circle and I pulled the largest frame from the decorative frames and I placed that on the outside, and I'm really liking this now. This is kind of pulling it together, and I do like that bold sentiment there. In fact, I like a lot of the layouts that we have gone through so far that I actually didn't end up using. So there's even more ideas than the 5 cards that I created for this video. And so hopefully watching this gives you guys some inspiration and some ideas, and maybe you can create some of these layouts, change up the colors, or, create it just as is. That's what these videos are for. They're for your inspiration and for you to copy if you want to. I have no problem with you guys creating exact duplicates of any of the cards that I create. It's why I make the videos. All right, so we have pretty much focused in on our final card here. All I have to do is pick the sentiment that I want to go with and adhere everything together. And I'll use a mix of foam and liquid adhesive for that. Now we will review this card at the end, but let's go ahead and jump into the next card. So for this one, we're going to use a combination of those decorative frames, both die cut and as a solid background. So I grabbed that coral reef and letterpressed background, and I decided to layer some of the decorative frames that were die cut on top in I think this one is the eucalyptus. So they will alternate in color between the coral reef and the eucalyptus. I also opted to use the darker brown, the espresso stamped flowers, because they had a little bit higher contrast than the other ones. And here I'm going to play around with a couple of layouts. You can see here I did one where I did a larger floral arrangement in the lower corner and a smaller one in the top corner. Now this will come into play in the 4th and 5th card. Again, it's again taking those mental notes. Even though I don't end up using that exact layout for this card, I know that that's a pleasing balanced arrangement, so I can tuck that away and use that for a future card. Ultimately, I opted to go for the left and the bottom of this kind of like a wraparound. And before I adhere my sentiment, I am going to try it in a couple different orientations just to make sure that another orientation doesn't look better. Because I don't have a set plan, I can go ahead and feel these out and play around with them. And again, several of these would have looked great as well. Now this one came together really quickly and all that's left is to adhere everything. So let's go ahead and review that at the end of the video and we'll jump into our next card. And you can see here, this card actually borrows a lot of the same elements from the background of the last card. So this one came together quite quickly. I went ahead and used some of those leftover gold foiled frames. And this time I wanted to use some of the multicolored flowers and I wanted to focus all of the florals right in the center. And a no-fail method for success with that is to create an S pattern. It provides movement in the design, especially when you're working with a lot of rectangles like we have here. It adds that movement and it leads the eye. It'll also leave you some extra space in the lower left-hand corner or the upper right-hand corner to fit your sentiment. And then any blank spaces that you have, you can always fill in with embellishments. Okay, so let's jump right into the next card. Now this one takes a departure from what we've been doing, but remember, I kind of bookmarked that circle die and we're gonna work that into this next card. Here I'm trying to decide whether to use the larger one or the smaller one. We do ultimately go with the larger one, but again, I've bookmarked that smaller die and we will use that on the next card. So my idea here was to use the Juliet Alpha here to spell out U. And then we're going to use that arrangement where we use the larger floral arrangement in the lower left, and then we flank that with the smaller one in the upper right. Again, this is going to provide great balance. We'll finish off the U with a sentiment, and I'll just kind of go through my sentiments here and see what fits well. And ultimately, I do end up with the so grateful for you, I think it is, or just grateful for you. I think it's grateful for you. Yeah, so I'm going to end up with the you, grateful for you. So it brings emphasis to the word you, but the white is blending on the white, so we're going to add a little bit of color to that you. And we're going to do this by simply ink blending some of that coral reef over these letters. Now you might have noticed that each card is quicker and quicker. It's coming together much more quickly. We took a lot of time in the first and the second card kind of working out ideas, and each time I saw something that I liked but didn't necessarily work for that card, I just took note of it and then I was able to incorporate some of those things into the subsequent cards. So each one of these is coming together more and more quickly. This one, all I have to do is finish ink blending those letters, adhere everything together, and then it's pretty much done. So let's go ahead and jump into our final card, which also happens to be my favorite. So I decided to borrow that same layout from the last card that we did. We're going to reincorporate that twisted pattern in the background, but this time we're going to use the die cuts. We're going to stack them so that it has a little height and it adds a little bit of natural shadow back there. So I'm just going to take this hot foiled one and we're going to glue it to a blank here. And then that again is going to give it a little bit of dimension and add a little bit of shadow. We're also going to reuse that folk edge circle there. This time we're going to use the smaller one and that's going to allow more of that twisted pattern in the background to shine. Now I did toy around with putting this on a colored background. So I've got that gradient blended background that I created. And I thought it would match perfect with our two-tone florals that we have here. And I'm still torn. I'm still torn as to whether I liked this or not, but I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for the white on white background, you guys. I absolutely love it. I try to do colored backgrounds and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But ultimately the white won out. I liked all of the color focus being on the florals here in the center. Now, if you've made it this far, it is time to review all of our finished cards. All right, so here is the first card. I absolutely love the way this one turned out. I do really love using these frames in more of it's almost a collage style that you would see in scrapbooking more often, but I think it works really well here on our card front and it's just something different and I absolutely love this. I did add a little gold thread bow there and I think it sets off that foil nicely. Second card here, we ended up with a more bold sentiment. I just felt like this bolder sentiment kind of carried the card a little bit more. I felt like it needed something strong right there in the center. And then that led us to our third card where again, we borrowed those rectangles. And then this time we added in a little movement by using that S curve there in our focal point. creating that nice flow. Speaking of flow, it's funny how these kind of progressively get more and more organic. So here we've got our next one where we've incorporated more of that movement, that round shape, getting away from those rectangles. And I absolutely love the way this one turned out. But again, it led me to my favorite, which is probably the most free form of all. It's got a lot of movement. There's movement in the colors, there's movement in the background, and then we've got movement in the floral arrangement. And that's kind of something similar to what I would watercolor. And I don't know that I would have come up with this layout right out of the gate had I not broke my craft sessions up into chunks and just focused on playing with the product versus putting the pressure on myself to create a finished card. I don't know that I would have come up with this one right out of the gate. Having that freedom of exploring different layouts because all of my pieces were already done and I had everything there at the ready really helped me to come up with lots of layouts in a very short amount of time. So hopefully this gives you some ideas and inspirations on how to stop collecting your craft supplies and start actually using them. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, make sure that you are subscribed so you don't miss any future videos. Everything featured will be listed in the description box below. And as always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching.